There's no time.
The time is
13
o'clock.
Hey y'all, it's us again, and it's episode 173.
Yeah, this is a legendary story here.
Going back to the paranormal on this one, somebody actually requested this, and I was shocked, I tell you, that we had never done a show on this, because this legend of the Bell Witch.
Yeah.
I actually grew up hearing this a lot, because both of my paternal grandparents were from Springfield, Tennessee, which is very near the current town of Adams, where all of the chicanery took place.
Yeah, this is some real, almost pre-redneck shit. This is early. It's pre-redneck.
Pre-redneck.
This is back when rednecks spoke with a British accent. Like
they wrote in like Victorian English
1810 and shit.
1810.
Yeah, 1810. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to continue to say it like that. 1810.
Okay, you go right ahead. Man, he's starting early. All right.
Kicking this shit off early.
But yeah, so it's like, so growing up, it's like, my grandparents had the, what they now call the Red Book, the authenticated history of the Bell Witch, which was written by Martin Ingram. And they also had, and I'm really mad because I can't find it. I used to have like a really small, like pamphlet size book that was, I think it was Echoes of the Bell Witch in the 20th Century was, I think, what it was called. And I have it in here somewhere, but I couldn't find the shit. Because I was looking for it for the show, like, before we started recording. And I'm like, where the fuck is that? And I've been, like, tearing my bookshelves apart and shit like that. And I can't find it. But I do have it somewhere, I promise. But so, yeah, this was something that, my grandparents heard when they were growing up. And they kind of, like, passed it down to us. I feel like the legend wasn't really all that well known, I feel like, until probably the Blair Witch Project came out in 1999, which is not directly based on the Bell Witch legend, but it kind of like took aspects of it and fictionalized it, because after that came out, like 4 or 5 movies based on the Bell Witch haunting came out, most of which are terrible.
In the very early 80s, after I had my experience with Mammoth Mountain Poltergeist, as a teenager, I went through all the paranormal and ghost books I could find. And this is one of the ones that came up. And I read it, and I was like, boy, that sure does sound like a poltergeist case.
Yeah.
Similar to mine, but not quite as detailed, you know what I mean? Interwoven with a lot of different people. I just kind of took the story at face value. But back in the early 80s, the Bell Witch must have been a local phenomenon. Nobody else knew what that was.
It was, yeah.
All right, because I would mention it every now and then, and nobody would know what it was, and you never heard it mentioned. It was only in the modern era that you start hearing it.
Like I said, because, I grew up hearing it because my grandparents were from there.
And the modern era, really, you could, for me, the modern era is the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I heard about it a little bit around that Blair Witch time.
Yeah.
The Blair Witch Project time. Blair Witch Project was really inspired by this poltergeist.
Yeah, like I said, it's not exactly the same, but they did use aspects of the legend, like in the Blair Witch legend.
I think the stories are kind of different, though. I didn't really see Blair Witch. I just saw little bits and pieces of it. But I kind of think, well, we'll get into this later. I kind of think the genre is very similar. I think it might be the same genre.
Yeah, I kind of have that suspicion as well. What an enigmatic statement we just made.
Yeah. But there's a lot more. There's a lot to the case historically and also in parapsychology. I don't think it was made up out of whole cloth.
Yeah.
It's just that you start looking at the dates, and we're going to get into that too.
Yeah, I have just I've been like spending the last 2 or 3 days. I've watched like every single documentary. I watched a bunch of the movies that were based on it, even the loosely based ones. I've read a bunch of different people's websites and stuff. I think the problem with the Bell, the reason that I find it an interesting story and that I always found it an interesting story growing up is because I find this type of folklore very fascinating. Even if it didn't really happen the way that it was supposed to have happened, which I suspect that it did not.
I'm going to tell you, it didn't happen the way they said it happened.
Yeah.
Some of this may have happened. We're going to see. You know,
Yeah.
now whether or not all this stuff happened in the same case, I don't know.
Right.
I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't we do the shout outs?
Yeah, we should do the
Do
shout outs
shout-outs,
first.
right.
And then what I was going to do, like, because like I said, I've got like 3 different like files of notes on this that I'm just going to kind of go back and forth, hopefully, without messing them up. What I was going to do is I was kind of going to, we'll go into like the legend, like what the legend is.
What it says.
What it says, like what was supposed to have
When
happened.
it came from. Yeah.
And all this other kind of stuff. I also wanted to get a little bit into some later on published accounts of people that said that they had encounters with the entity, like later on, maybe in the 20th century and stuff. And then after that, I kind of want to get into maybe some debunking type of stuff, maybe some historical inaccuracies, and other kind of like interesting things about what really happened around that time period and around the people that were supposedly involved in it that, you know, maybe suggest something else was going on. You know what I'm saying?
Look, could be that Blair Witch, could be that the Bell Witch case, you know, is your favorite case, and you believe that everything in this case. We're not here to shit on this case. I'm not going to shit on this case.
I find this very interesting. I always have,
It's a very
ever since I was a
interesting
kid.
case. But we might have a slightly different take on this case.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have a, having witnessed poltergeist myself, I have a different interpretation of what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And like I said, other people, other writers have kind of come at it from how you're coming at it.
Have they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, I tried to read like all different kind of sources about this. And
I just
all
know
this
the
other kind of
legends. I really haven't. It's not my
Yeah.
job to read up what other people say about the legend.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I want to keep my opinion pool untainted. You know what I'm talking about? I want to have an original opinion, even if it lines up with what somebody else thinks. At least I came to that conclusion independently.
On your own, right? Yeah.
Independently.
I
right.
get that. All right. So before we get into talking about the legend of the Bell Witch, we have a couple of shout outs. Firstly, I would like to thank Melanie for her very generous PayPal donation. Christmas present, she said. So thank you very much, Melanie. She often sends us very generous donations, and they are all very much appreciated. I would also like to thank Jesus, who also sent us a PayPal donation this week. Also very much appreciated. You
Money
guys
from
roll.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
man.
We got, and it's Christmas time. Jesus sent us.
Jesus sent us money. Bro. That's awesome.
Jesus loves our show.
That shit was from heaven.
That's kind of cool. That's how
From
I'm going
money
to think of it.
From money heaven.
From money heaven.
David Bowie mentioned that in the Tin Machine
That's
album.
right.
Yeah, money comes from money heaven. Yeah.
And, you know, different types of food come from different type of food. If, like, there's a Twinkie heaven, there's, like, you know what I mean? There's a heaven for every single
All right,
thing.
thank you, Jesus.
Yes, thank you very much. Also, I mentioned this on Patreon, but our $20 and up patrons, we are putting together the shirt that we're going to send out to you guys.
You guys gonna love this fucking shirt.
Well, I like how it came out.
Have we told them what the shirt is?
No. I only just finished designing it.
It's fucking awesome. Okay, it's a 13 o'clock, and this is relevant to this month. This month there will be a Friday the 13th.
There will be, yes.
Okay, so the shirt will be a Friday the 13th movie mashup with 13 o'clock. So it says 13 o'clock, but it's coming at you like the Friday the 13th motif from the very first movie.
From the
It's
first
breaking through the glass.
Yeah.
That's what it's gonna be.
It doesn't look exactly the same, but it like suggests that.
It suggests that we couldn't do it because it's got to be in one color, and to get the shading right, we had to do some stuff to it.
Yeah, but it looks
Because
enough like it that it
you'll know what it is.
I mean, I know what it is, and I found like the font that
Yeah.
had like I think the second and third one. Like somebody designed a font called Friday 13 that's free.
Yeah.
That's just like the font on the posters, and I was like,
it's
thank
the same
you,
font,
whoever
but
you are,
it's
font
the
designer.
same font, but it's a different, in the same angle, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just it's got different shading on it.
Yeah. Well, the
And
big
the glass is a
big
little bit
13, because what I did was I did kind of a mashup of two different posters. Because like I said, there's one that had the 13, like Friday 13th, like coming at you, like coming out of like glass, and that's just like a plain font. That's just, I think it was just Helvetica.
Yeah.
But the other font that was on some of the later posters and some of the alternate first movie posters is kind of like a rough looking, you know what I mean? Almost like a handwriting type of font. And so I have like a little like the subtext in that one. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I sent like all the $20 patrons a message on Patreon making sure that I have your most current mailing address, make sure, if you want a men's shirt, a women's shirt, what size you want, stuff like that. So I've got several of you have gotten back to me, but if you haven't gotten back to me, please try to do that by like around the 15th or like the middle of the month.
This shirt's actually going to be a seller, I think. If anybody wants to buy this shirt just without being a subscriber, just leave us a message in the comments, and we'll get with you.
We'll make extra ones, because we just basically just make as many. Like we make them for the patrons and then send them out.
And if somebody buys some more, I'll make more.
Yeah, and then like I said, we might. I don't know. I might put some up on eBay.
They're handmade by us. This is not going to be,
Yeah, we screen print them.
Yeah, this one's going to be screen printed
ourselves.
Right.
So yeah. If
the quality's going to be top notch.
if you're a $20 and up patron, you should check your email because I did send you a message about that. Other than that, just the regular shout outs. Go check out my book, The Associated Villainies, which, like I said, it's short stories, horror stories. I did like a second edition. New print version, new ebook version, and I also did a audiobook version, which is the first time that I've ever done that. So go check that out. And also Faceless Villain 3, obviously, is also available in all three formats. I probably, like I said, I'm going to do all my fiction, and eventually, I think enough people have recommended that I do a fourth Faceless Villain volume called like Millennium or something like that. That's 2000 to 2019. Just because,
it's there,
and like it's 20 years, just like the other ones were, and we're just now ending. So I figured, that's probably the next thing I'll read. That will probably not be out until probably late next year, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But I might start working on that like in the new year.
We need to cook up something kind of like a 4-book package deal to buy the whole series.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and see if I can figure out how I can do that. Amazon will usually do that on purpose, because they have that thing where it's like if you buy one thing, like underneath it says, if you buy like these two things together, then you get like $5 off or some shit like that. They do that sometimes for.
They don't have it so you can sell them in a package, like with new packaging around all for $4.
I don't think so. I would have to. I could look into it. Because, like I said, I do, I sell through Amazon through what used to be CreateSpace, but it's not called that anymore. But I don't think I could do that. But I would have to do that as like a special edition type of thing. And then I would have to like design the box separate. Up, so. It would, probably, because that would be like a lot of extra.
Right. Be better stuff. Just to buy the series at one
at a time. Okay. I have thought about maybe in the future doing like a big, like a hardback with all of the books in one volume.
Yeah.
Like with like a timeline and all that other kind of stuff. But that, I might do that eventually just because I enjoy doing that type of thing.
Yeah, it's probably too big to do it on paperback, huh?
Yeah, it would be, because it would be well over 1,000 pages.
Right.
I think I put the 3 books together like in one file, like in InDesign or something like that, and I think it ended up being like 1,200 pages or some shit.
Right.
And it's like, there's only I think the paperback books, I think you can only go up to 800 pages or 900 pages.
Okay.
Like, because I guess the way they print it in the spine and whatever, they don't really let you do that. But, we'll see how that goes. I'll figure it out one of these days. I just do shit whenever, like, by the seat of my pants. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah, you do.
Well.
We talk about it. Not by the seat of the pants, but.
Well, sometimes it kind
of what it is we try some stuff and we run into problems, then we have to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And some things never really happened. Some things we planned to do never really happened.
Well, for whatever reason.
But that public doesn't really know about them.
Yeah.
So, but everything we bring to market recently, the quality's been really good, especially since we got the new recording equipment.
Yeah, we've definitely been trying to
the problem was our early audio books. We got to go, and they're almost all of them are replaced, I think now.
Yeah, except for the really short ones. I've redone all of the
audio on Mammoth Mountain. Is it good enough? Does it need to be replaced?
I might eventually redo that, but we were talking about expanding that book out. We might do that in the future too, like making it longer.
We could expand. I can improve on that story.
Yeah.
With more details and stuff.
And the Steve Marrow ones, I might eventually end up putting those 2 short books together in a longer volume with another case of his.
See, when we first came up with Mammoth Mountain Poltergeist, I wanted it to be as short and clinical as possible.
Yeah.
Because I wanted people in the parapsychology, racket, if that's what you want to call it.
Field, I thought you were going to say.
Yeah.
Racket seems a little loaded word.
I'm not sure parapsychologists are what they used to be nowadays. Some of the shit that I've heard them say. But I wanted it to be kind of short and concise for them and to be kind of clinical. And some people thought that it was even scarier that it was like that.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's kind of what I was shooting for.
yeah,
Because I found it a very scary story.
yeah.
To me, it's like, it's scarier if you don't embellish it. That's why I don't really find, like, I like some paranormal shows, like A Haunting and stuff, but I don't find them particularly scary because they, like...
The thing is, though, is that
They embellish
Red
them too
reminded
much.
me of a couple more stories and things that had happened later on, didn't he? Or,
Yeah.
or was that in there, too, about the Matchbox cars?
Yeah, that was in there.
That was in there? Okay.
I mean, you know, we could,
All right.
like...
I have to reread it again.
Yeah, and then you can, like, think if there was other stuff. So that's, like, another project that we were thinking about doing that may or may not come to
Some
fruition.
of the stuff
We'll see.
involving Wesley came out of Wesley's mouth, and I'm not sure he knew what I was asking him to. I don't know.
Yeah, we might have to, like, reconduct.
Because he kind of changes his story, every time I
Yeah.
ask him being kind of deaf
Because,
and
I mean,
autistic.
yeah, I mean...
He knew something was going on, but he didn't really know what it was.
Right. And, I mean, at this point, I mean, Red has passed away. Lois and Wesley are still alive.
Yeah.
But maybe we can re-interview them or...
Yeah, well, stuff happened after that, though, too.
That's true.
That maybe should go in there.
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, that's another thing that we might do next year sometime. All right, so are you ready to talk about the legend of the Bell Witch?
Yeah.
All right, so this story supposedly began in the early 19th century. Now, there was a family, the Bell family, obviously, the patriarch of which was John Bell. Now, over the winter of 1804 to 1805, he moved his family. They were originally from North Carolina, and, I might get into that a little bit later on. They moved up to the Red River Bottomland in Robertson County, Tennessee. Now, this was a community, and at the time it was called Red River. Later on, the name was changed to Adams Station, and nowadays it's just called Adams. But at the time it was called Red River. So he moved there. He bought, several acres of land. I believe it was over 300 acres, and built a large house there for his family. Now, him and his wife, Lucy, eventually ended up having, I think they had 7 kids altogether. 3 of them were born in Tennessee, like after they had moved there. The other 4 had been born while they were still in North Carolina. Now, the trouble began, allegedly, in 1817. Now, pretty much every version of the legend that I've read, the first thing that happened was that John Bell was either out hunting or he was out, like, dicking around in his cornfield, looking at the ears or whatever, and he sees, like, a weird-looking animal sitting in the middle of one of the corn rows. This animal reportedly had a dog's body and a rabbit's head.
Yeah.
Now, supposedly, John Bell was very discombobulated, let's say, by the appearance of this bizarre-looking animal.
I tell you what, when I first found this case and was reading about it a few years after the whole Mammoth Mountain thing went down, and he gave that description, I was just wondering if a poltergeist could do that. It did kind of freak me out.
It's weird because
like,
I
wait a
wrote
minute,
about
hold
some
on.
other cases. Maybe this was a thing. Like, maybe this was like a trope.
Yeah.
Because I wrote about some other cases, like in The Unseen Hand, where people supposedly saw, like, unusual animals. I mean, look at that. There was that whole Jeff the Talking Mongoose thing.
Yeah.
There was, and I've seen, like, a couple of other cases where people reported seeing a funny-looking animal.
Yeah, and you see, I think I had already read those other cases by the time got to this one. Because this one was less rare than the Talking Mongoose one, actually.
Yeah.
Excuse me. This one was more rare than
the Talking Mongoose. Yeah,
Mongoose
that one I think was more well known at the time.
And I was like, my poltergeist never showed me any animals or any strange animals. And I thought at the time it was either some kind of just a fabrication, or maybe they were having hallucinations, that maybe a poltergeist would make you think you saw something.
Yeah.
Like inserted a damn psychic image in your head. But then later on, as I started to read more and more, I started getting into demonology, and some of the accounts of demonology that go back to like the 14 and the 1500s describe strange, like, satanic animals.
It's a very common, like I said, it's a very common thing in these types of...
I have a feeling that this was, that the mixed strange animal thing was something out of witchcraft and demonology books.
Yeah, I kind of suspect that as
so
well.
that's what they're reporting, and that's supposed to harken back to, like, what was it, the Maleficarum? What was the name of that fucking book about
Malleus Maleficarum.
Malleus Maleficarum?
Hammer of the Witches.
Yeah, because I think that type of imagery is in that. So
I think it is. Yeah, now that I'm thinking, I have a copy of it somewhere, but I don't know where that is either.
Any kind of person with a Christian upbringing would have mentioned that. Kind of like how a person with an Islamic background will always mention jinns if they see anything paranormal.
I feel like the thing about the weird animals is maybe it's kind of like shorthand for an unholy creature, and it's like a harbinger of bad shit to come.
Something demonic, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably what it is, because I do see that trope like turns up in a lot of these types of stories, and it's usually a lot of them are from like the 16th or 17th century, and I feel like it's always kind of like, oh, it's demonic, and like it's like signifying something.
Fell out of popularity, but I think you could say that reappeared a little bit in Hollywood with The Omen, with the damn dog.
Yeah. Although black dogs, that's like a big thing. And I mean, particularly in England too. I mean, there's like, even now to this day, as far as I know, there's still like sightings of black dogs and things like that. And it's always like, it's supposed to be like an ill omen,
Well, that's what this is.
So that might be what this is. But very specifically, this was supposed to look like a dog body with a rabbit head.
Right.
So now John Bell shot at it, apparently, but then it disappeared. Now, reportedly, Bell thought this was kind of weird, as you would, but he's just like, oh, well, maybe I just didn't see it right, or maybe it was just some weird animal, or I don't know, it was like a mutant or whatever. So he just goes back to the house and didn't really think any more about it. Now, apparently that night at the house, the whole family started hearing what sounded like knocking or beating sounds, like on the outside walls of their house.
Now, this is common in old-fashioned poltergeist reports.
Yeah.
Knocking.
Yeah. And this is usually the first manifestation. It usually starts.
Which was strange, because I didn't know anything about poltergeist phenomenon when I had my poltergeist episode happen, and it didn't start with knocking.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking maybe the reports of knocking, maybe that might be related to spiritualism later on.
I feel like that might be
in the 1800s. With
because
seances.
What was that? 1848, the Fox sisters.
Yeah.
That were like cracking their toe joints and whatnot, and like making knocking sounds, like to answer questions.
But it's easy to replicate knocks during seances.
Very easy.
I think that kind of got into the zeitgeist, that when spirits appear, you're going to hear knocking.
Yeah.
So they kind of fulfilled two different things right there, didn't they? Mm-hmm. A satanic animal and knocking.
Yeah.
So they got their grounds covered. They got their bases covered.
Yeah.
You noticed that too?
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a lot of very common tropes in this story.
Yeah, and they're reporting two of the most common beginnings of something paranormal, but back old school style.
Yeah.
That 1600s shit.
Oh yeah,
16
definitely.
And 1800s.
It's either knocking or like rocks falling on the roof.
Yeah.
That's like that's one of the two most common beginnings of like paranormal activity.
Yeah. Okay.
So so they start hearing these noises on the outside of their house. There were also some other kind of unusual things reported around this time. One of the Bell sons, whose name was Drew, or Drury, I guess it was Drury and Drew was short for it. Speaking of weird animals, he supposedly saw a bird, whose species he could not ascertain, that was like kind of sitting on a fence. And he said it was like really, really big, and he had never seen a bird like that before, and he like shot it and it flew away. The youngest daughter, Betsy, who would become the target of the manifestations later on, she also said that she saw a girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of an oak tree. One of the slaves of the family, whose name was Dean, which was actually short for Aberdeen, he actually said that he would go to visit his wife at night, like going home from the Bell house, and he would be followed by a mysterious black dog all the time. So the sounds keep getting worse and worse, the knocking and beating on the walls and stuff. They start hearing it pretty much every night. John Bell and the sons would like run outside to see who it was or if something was out there. And of course, nothing was ever there. then it kind of progressed on to a point where apparently the Bell children were waking up in the middle of the night, and they said that they heard like animals gnawing like on their bedposts, or they heard like scratching or gnawing types of sounds,
and rats.
And they thought it was rats, like chewing on their bed.
That's another commonly reported audio phenomenon for the beginning of poltergeist.
Yeah, scratching
In the inside of the walls.
Or chewing. Is, less common.
Like it's rats, but then they can't find any
then they can't find any rats. And that was apparently the case in this situation. Then a little bit further along, the kids started reporting that their covers were being pulled off them in the middle of the night. Also very common. Their pillows would be thrown off onto the floor. They also reported that there were sounds of dogs fighting in the room, but you couldn't see any dogs. They also said there were sounds that sounded like chains being dragged across the floor.
That's real old school there.
Yeah, that's
that goes back to ancient Rome.
That's like a Christmas Carol, too. Yeah. I was thinking of that.
First time that one was reported was in ancient Rome.
What, the chains being dragged across the floor? Yeah.
Yeah. Who was it? Wasn't Cicero.
I don't remember.
Somebody turned around and saw a damn ghost with chains rattling his chains, and he refused to see that. He said he was a man of logic and not superstition, so that wasn't there. And then he looked away.
Like I said, it was like a Christmas Carol. He was a fragment of an underdone potato.
Yeah. And then when he looked back, it wasn't there. And he said ghosts didn't exist.
Yeah, okay.
They saw one, but it wasn't real.
Well, the logical assumption you would make is that, I must be seeing shit.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's like less of a leap than ghosts exist.
Could have been that he saw a ghost and then he scared him shitless and he denied it.
That's also a possibility.
Because he said he saw the damn ghost.
Yeah.
He saw the ghost, but he didn't believe in ghosts. They don't exist, so he looked away.
So therefore,
it wasn't there, and then he looked back and it was gone.
I got
But that bitch saw the ghost. So
Just too scared. Now, also reportedly around this time, and I don't think I attribute this to anything paranormal, but John Bell began experiencing paralysis, like around his mouth and stuff. Now, the reason I say that I don't attribute that to anything paranormal is that because, according to several sources, John Bell suffered from some undisclosed malady, but I've seen some sources say that it was likely Bell's palsy, which is actually not named after him. It was named before him. But it's kind of like like some nerve damage in your face or something like that, where it's kind of like, you kind of like can't move half your face and stuff like that. So he had something like that, and I think at this point it was starting to manifest itself. Now, as the phenomena continued, the family then reported that they started hearing whispering voices. Now, at first they couldn't understand what these voices were saying because they were very feeble and very quiet. They said sometimes it sounded like an old woman's voice and that she was singing like hymns or religious songs. Also around this time that the voices started, as I said before, the youngest daughter, Betsy, started becoming the clear focus of the attacks. She would often be slapped around, like in her bedroom, and there would be like hand-shaped like welts like on her face and her body and stuff like that, where this entity was supposedly slapping her.
And that was reported many times since then too.
Yeah, that's again very common. All of this stuff is very common,
right.
Commonly reported in numerous poltergeist cases. Also pulled her hair a lot.
Yeah.
One story I read said that that the entity would take her hair and like tie it like around the bedpost, so like when she woke up she couldn't get up and stuff like that. Again, that's very common. Now, apparently at this point, John Bell was like, he tells the family, he's like, look, he doesn't, I guess it's like freaking them out, obviously. They also seem like kind of ashamed of it, and they don't want to tell anybody about it.
That's what me, Lois, and Red, that's our reaction.
Yeah.
We didn't want to tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
Didn't. Well, we had the sneaking suspicion that if you told somebody that it would stop to make you look like a fool, and then when they'd leave, it would just do it again.
Well, probably.
That's kind of the way it was.
If it's real, that's probably what it would do. I mean, that's
that's how it acted. Because you wanted it to do something. Sometimes it would just be like, "Fuck you."
Yeah, he would just be like that cartoon with the singing frog, where it's like it would sing around that one guy, but then when he brought somebody else, Like when he put it on stage and charged people money, it wouldn't do anything. It just sat there and riveted.
We knew its game early on. It was to just frustrate your all attempts of getting down to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So because John Bell didn't want to tell the world at large about his apparent poltergeist problem, but he did kind of want another, like an outside witness or whatever, so he consults with his best friend, who was also his neighbor, whose name was James Johnston, and kind of told him about it and said, can you come over and see if you can figure out what's going on? So James Johnston apparently comes over to the Bell house with his wife, and they're going to spend the night over there. Apparently the phenomena did manifest itself that evening, and Johnston did see it. So the next day, he pretty much tells John Bell, he's like, well, I think you have a spirit, like a biblical type of spirit. So I guess he means kind of like a demonic spirit, I guess is what the implication was there. Now, even though presumably John Bell told his friend, hey, keep this on the down low, but I guess that didn't happen because not long after Johnston and his wife had stayed at the house and experienced the phenomena, word started to leak out about this paranormal activity going on at the Bell household near the Red River. So, apparently, so people started trying to come to the farm, like from neighboring towns and stuff, to see what was going on. Also at this point, it seems that the entity, if that's what it was, as I said before, they just heard like kind of whispering and singing and stuff, but eventually the voice got louder and more distinct and would eventually end up like carrying on entire conversations. So apparently Johnston, the first thing that he asked to the spirit was, who are you and what do you want? And apparently the apparition said, I am a spirit. I was once very happy, but I have been disturbed. So some versions of the legend have them finding like a skull or some bones or something like that on a nearby mound and saying that was a person that, whose unquiet spirit it was or whatever. But that's not usually, that's just in some versions of it that I've seen, with the implication that this is like a ghost that lived there and wasn't at rest for whatever reason. It also gave different, once it kind of started talking, it also gave different kind of stories about its origin. Like it would say something like, that there was a disturbance to a Native American burial ground around here, which I think was where, that kind of trope began.
Yeah. And evidently it's just speaking out of thin air.
Yeah, that no one, as far as I know, other than Betsy Bell reporting seeing a girl hanging from a tree, and some people subsequently that said that they saw a figure or a shadow like in Bell Witch Cave, like later on. I don't think anyone ever saw this entity. There was always a voice.
Yeah.
And, there was always paranormal, like, poltergeist type phenomena, but nobody ever saw anything. That
particular effect was in my poltergeist experience. It only spoke once, and it wasn't, you couldn't comprehend what it said. It was just blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, you said it sounded like
something underwater.
Like a water barrel.
It was
water
fucking bizarre, man. Really bizarre. And then on this book right here, which is really, I think, the definitive book on the fucking case right there, that one. All right, long out of print. This house is haunted. Guy lying Playfair. This poltergeist spoke a lot, the Enfield poltergeist, but it spoke out of a girl.
Yeah.
And I kind of think it was. It also made dog noises.
Yeah.
I don't think it was paranormal in the way you would think something was paranormal. I think a poltergeist focus sometimes can start to manifest something similar to Tourette's syndrome.
Yeah.
That's what I think, and it's voices, voices from the subconscious, the thing that's actually causing all this. You can get back to, this goes back to Jung,
Yeah.
The unconscious.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I think it is. Now, whether or not in this particular case was there talking, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
I don't want to really, we'll just let this unfold, and then you know what I mean.
And then you'll gotta get into it.
I'll get into it a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit more.
So, like I said, there were different stories about what this entity said that it was. Like I said, Native American burial ground. It also reportedly told Drew Bell, which is one of John Bell's sons, and a friend of his or a neighbor of theirs, that there was a hidden treasure like somewhere around there. And the two guys went like very excitedly and dug out the place, and then reportedly they didn't find anything, and then the entity laughed at them for being so dumb and falling for it. One very famous story about the Bell Witch is that one time she repeated 2 sermons being given 13 miles apart. You know what I mean? Like she knew exactly what the sermons were, and these 2 different, and it was 2 different denominations. I think one was a Baptist church, one was a Methodist church, or something like that. So this entity appeared to know like a lot about the Bible, like had a lot of, biblical text memorized, and liked arguing about different biblical matters, different religious matters. Also supposedly knew what was going on in neighbors' houses, and like would kind of share gossip with the family. It's like, hey, guess what these people next door are doing right now? You know what I mean?
That's a commonly reported ability.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's another common thing.
And also, in cases of kind of possession, and there's overlap. There's an overlap between poltergeist case and possession. You can misdiagnose poltergeist as possession also, and in certain cases, the poltergeist focus or the kid that's responsible for a lot of this has knowledge that he or she could not possess, like knowing how much to the exact cent how much money somebody has in their pocket.
Yeah,
that kind of weird stuff, or where like where somebody got a certain object, like a necklace that they're wearing. I know who gave that to you. That kind of stuff. It's just a weird phenomenon, and Carl Jung would have a lot to say about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, cosmic unconsciousnesses and stuff like that.
Yeah, maybe just like plucking it out of the ether and accessing the information.
Ability to access information that, would seemingly be impossible, but it's like quantum consciousness. It's quantum information.
Yeah, it's like the part of your consciousness that's like linked in.
That's linked in with everything, right?
Yeah, I could see that. I mean,
In that new movie that we saw was a Dr. Sleep.
Yeah.
When that person goes out of body. It was the quantum unconscious was kind of like the cosmic unconscious because he pictured it as, remember, a filing cabinet. And he's going through the filing cabinets to find information. Yeah.
Which is how I always kind of thought of that type of stuff.
Well, when I had some of those out of body experiences, I was aware that you could do that.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the time.
Yeah.
Which is weird because you're in a timeless state, which That's something else I covered in another show we did here about the out-of-body experience.
Yeah, that was a while back, but yeah, we did do a show about that.
Yeah, and NDE, near-death experience.
Yeah, because you kind of talked a lot about it, because you've had both of those, so.
And who else has been talking about this in the mainstream would be Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan talks about this when he's talking about taking ayahuasca and some of these weird drugs. And I don't laugh at it.
Yeah.
I could easily believe that some of these weird mind-altering drugs might allow you to access certain forms of consciousness that normally you would only be able to achieve while you were in some kind of a trance, or possibly even only when you were dead could you access that form of consciousness.
Yeah.
Or dying. But I'd love to try it. I'm
kind of curious as well.
Talking to alien souls and stuff like that, and what they tell you turns out to be true, that kind of shit. That's what they report.
Yeah.
You have to go over to the Yucatan Peninsula to get that shit, evidently. Go on some kind of spirit walk with some shaman.
Yeah.
They say it makes you sick as a dog, man.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. Just diarrhea and everything, you might as well just stay naked. Walk around talking to the alien souls and shit.
And shit.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, so again, going back to what you were saying about, maybe pulling knowledge out of the consciousness or whatever. Yeah. A couple of other stories about the Bell Witch were that John Johnston, who was James's son, he actually wanted to prove I guess, so the story goes, that the entity was real or wasn't just like one of the family members like playing a trick or whatever. So he asked it something that only someone in his family would know, evidently. The question that he asked was, you know, his step-grandmother was Dutch, and she lived back in North Carolina still. He's like, now, if one of the slaves did something bad in the household, what would she say to them? Because she had a thing that she said to them. And apparently the Bell Witch answered correctly, and answered in the accent of the woman, which they thought was very weird. Also, there was another story about a guy who was unnamed, but he's an Englishman, and he actually came to the Bell house because he had heard about the legend and he was curious about it. Even though he was like skeptical, he wanted to see that if it was all bullshit. So he said that, so apparently he's trying to talk to this spirit or whatever, and the spirit like starts talking in the voice of his parents back in England. And he said it sounded exactly like them. And apparently the witch then like woke him up, and the voices of his parents were saying that they were worried about him because back in England they had heard his voice like coming out of thin air. So that's another kind of story about it.
Yeah, and if this is true, then this is quite a special case, because poltergeists have been known to like I said, speak through the voice box of someone else, or to use someone else, kind of like they're in a trance state. Because evidently Janet Hobson could do it for hours.
Yeah.
But poltergeist speaking out of thin air, it's very rarely ever reported. And if it is, it's usually only a word or two.
Yeah.
You know.
This was, I mean, apparently this was entire conversations. Like you could sit and have an entire conversation.
That's odd. I almost kind of red flag that.
Well, I do as well, but like I said, I'll get into that later.
Right.
So now, even though from the beginning of the manifestations, the Bell Witch, who, like I said, it's not a witch, obviously, but it just got that tag kind of later on. It was a real asshole to Betsy Bell, and it would do like mischievous things. I mean, to her, it seemed like it was like violent toward her and stuff. However, the weird thing was that John Bell's wife, Lucy, for some reason, the Bell Witch really, really liked her. Called her the most perfect woman to walk the earth. Would sing her songs when she was sick. She would bring her things like nuts and grapes and stuff like that and leave them on her bed, like for her to snack on or whatever.
Like a Jekyll and Hyde personality.
I guess so. It's just like this.
It could love you or it could hate you.
Yeah, it was really weird, but
Yeah.
That's one thing that's very commonly reported, that it's like really, really liked the mom for whatever reason and never did anything to hurt her. So, as I said, the voice started getting, louder, it started having conversations and stuff. And so the story goes, it drew the attention of Andrew Jackson, who would become the 7th president, but was at this time a major general in the U.S. Army. Now, he did own some property in the Red River area, although I'm not sure if he really was in this area at the time. But the story goes that he had heard about the Bell Witch and was really curious about it, and since he owned some land around there, he thought he would just go check it out. So apparently, this was in 1819, so Jackson and a bunch of his men, show up on the Bell farm, in a wagon or whatever. So they approach the property and the wagon comes to a dead stop and they can't get it to go again.
The wheels evidently froze up.
Yeah, so the wheels froze up or something of that nature. Yeah. So all of the guys they're trying to push it, they're trying to do something, it won't budge. And so at this point, Jackson is said to have proclaimed, "By the eternal, boys, that must be the Bell Witch." And then apparently a voice that coming out of a bush over there, they said it sounded like metallic, that this metallic female voice comes out of a bush and says, yeah, you can go on ahead now, but I'll see you later, at the house, right. You know what I mean? So Jackson and the guys go on to the house. And then, apparently Andrew Jackson and John Bell start having this big long discussion about various other things.
Yeah, he had some fucking bodyguard with him who was a badass who had his pistol loaded up with silver bullets.
That's what I was just going to say.
He was gonna shoot that
one of his retinue was this guy. I don't know what his name is. I saw like on one website that it was like this Colonel Gordon or something like that. He claimed to be a witch layer or a witch tamer. And he said, so apparently they've been sitting around the house and like nothing is happening.
He tamed him by laying him.
I guess so. I know what I mean. I was like, I have no idea what that is all about. So, and I don't
dicking them bitches down.
Dicking them down.
Yeah, dicking them down.
I don't even know, like,
dicking them down to submission.
How do you get the reputation of being a witch tamer? I mean, I was like, how many witches do you encounter in the course of your day-to-day life that you would, like, get that reputation that would precede you?
Yeah, I would admit, this whole part of the story
I think this is kind of a self-professed witch tamer.
Yeah. I think this part of the story is, like, the icing on the cake. It's a part of the story to add credibility to the rest of the story. The hey, man, the president saw it.
Yeah, even though he wasn't president at the time.
Yeah, he wasn't president at the time, but we're going to get into that.
I think it was like 10 years later.
We're going to get into that later. The more you know this story, the more it seems like a Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
All right.
I would agree with that.
And in my experience, my personal experience, poltergeist cases don't have plots to them.
Yeah.
And they don't have very many characters, and there's never any resolution.
Yeah.
And also, the people outside the sphere of the phenomenon don't believe that it's happening.
Yeah.
It's not something that goes viral.
Yeah.
There's just not enough evidence left over from each little occurrence.
Well, the problem with a lot of these, and I ran into this a lot when I was writing the book about it, is that pretty much the only evidence that you have is
testimony.
Witness testimony.
And it's terrible.
Which is evidence. Generally not a very good...
Yeah.
Not very good evidence in the best of circumstances.
Our poltergeist left no physical evidence other than that little sheet of toilet paper with the 3 drops of blood on it.
Yeah.
Which is one of our bloods. That blood didn't just come from nowhere. We don't know how it got it.
Yeah.
It just did it. And we have some pictures of the things that it did. What I mean? They're in the book. But it's stuff that a human could do.
Yeah. So, that's what I mean. You can't prove anything from that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, well, you just did that.
Only thing that, in terms of physical evidence, that lends credibility to my story is why the fuck are we taking pictures of this shit? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's like, why are we...
It was in 81. I'm going to go get in my damn time machine and go back to 81 and take pictures of some towels. Folded up towels that are towels shaped into smiley faces and shit.
Yeah, and I should note, too, that I think it was... weren't they Polaroid pictures?
Yeah.
And that wasn't cheap back then, too. No. It's like, why would you waste money, taking pictures of just, like, a bed with towels on it?
Just taking pictures of the things that it did.
Yeah. It's just...
You know what I mean? It doesn't prove shit, but that's what we were taking pictures of the shit.
And I'm just like, why would you take pictures of that?
Yeah.
And waste... Like I said, I remember Polaroid film being, kind of expensive. And there weren't that many pictures.
It was weird. It was really weird,
Yeah.
But I'll tell you one thing. Is it left concrete proof for all of us that shit really did happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I can kind of like link back to that era and go, that was fucking weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't just something that we just remembered. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's fucking weird, dude. And, fucking Jenny's seen minor stuff around the house here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not as impressive as it used to be, and it doesn't last as long as it used to last.
Yeah, it's still weird, but it's like not...
It's not as earth-shattering as it was because I've explained it to myself of what it is.
Yeah.
Science will figure it out eventually.
Yeah.
Physics.
So, apparently, Jackson and his dudes have been, sitting around in Belle's house, and I guess some of the dudes are getting, a little cheesed off that nothing exciting is happening. So, Mr. Witch Tamer... he starts, they've been there several hours. He decides he's going to take out his pistol and says, I got a silver bullet in this.
Yeah.
And any evil spirit that pops out, I'm going to kill it.
Yeah.
And then he went on to say that he's like, oh, well, maybe the reason that the witch hasn't like popped out in the last few hours is because she's scared of this shit. She's scared of the witch tamer with the silver bullet.
Yeah.
Now, right after he said that, according to the story, he started like jerking around and screaming and stuff like that. And he said that he felt like he was being beaten and stuck with pins by an invisible hand. So I guess he pissed the witch off. So witch tamer, not so much. And also, I've seen two versions of the story. One version says that he was dragged bodily out of the house by his nose. The other version of the story says that the witch kicked him in the ass and like kicked him out the door. Yeah. So apparently the entity then spoke up and said, oh, by the way, there's another fraud among your little friends here. If you hang around until tomorrow night, I'll tell you who the other one is. Right? Yeah. Now, at this point, according to the story, Jackson's men are all freaking out and they all want to leave. But Jackson is curious. He's like, oh, I want to find out who the other motherfucker is. And she's going to tell me tomorrow night. So we have to stay. But, but the men's like, well, we're not sleeping in the house. So they went outside to sleep in the tents and kept like pestering him. It's like, we really got to get out of here. This shit isn't cool and all this other kind of shit. So finally, I guess he didn't hang around until the next night because I guess he got tired of like his men pissing and moaning and wanting to leave. Because apparently they were seen in Springfield the next day because he had packed up and left. Another version of the story said that after he ended up leaving the farm, that he later said to someone, I'd rather fight the entire British army than to deal with the Bell Witch. So apparently it scared him too. But like I said, there are differing versions of that legend. Now, about this time, the youngest daughter, Betsy Bell, she starts kind of getting a romantic interest in this fella named Joshua Gardner, who also lived in the same town. Now, they were actually going to get married, but apparently, for whatever reason, the Bell Witch did not want this to happen. She never explained why. So pretty much so every time like the two of them would go somewhere, like they go down to the cave or they go down to the river to like have a little date or make out or whatever it was they were doing, the Bell Witch would apparently follow them and like torment them and like yell at them and kick them and shit like that. You know what I mean? Because she didn't want them to get married for whatever reason. So there was also, Betsy also had another suitor, who was named Richard Powell. Now he had been her school teacher. There was 11 years between them. That wasn't, that's not really all that unusual. Cause I think even John Bell and his wife had 11, 12, maybe even 17, 18 years between them. And there were stories going around, and these might be later extrapolations, that the school teacher, Richard Powell, was interested in the occult as well, and maybe that's why he was interested in Betsy. I don't really know what the whole deal was there. There were also stories that he was secretly married to someone else back in Nashville. But I guess Betsy didn't want to marry him, so that whole thing. So because Betsy and Joshua, had wanted to get married, but apparently the Bell Witch just kept fucking with them. And apparently in 1821, Betsy couldn't take it anymore, and she broke off the engagement with Joshua. She's like, look, the witch doesn't want it to happen, and I'm just, like, sick of dealing with this shit, so we better just break up, because otherwise. Now, after that happened, because apparently that was the Bell Witch's mission for a while, to keep them from getting married. Although, like I said, I don't know why she wanted that, and she never explained. So after the engagement was broken, then apparently, she decided that she was going to set her sights on John Bell, because now she suddenly decided she hated his ass and that she was going to kill him. Now, through this whole time, like I said, John Bell had been suffering from some type of, I believe it was Bell's palsy or something similar. His face would twitch and things like that, kind of like a stroke or whatnot. He couldn't swallow, he had a hard time swallowing. And it started getting worse and worse. Now, by the time the fall of 1820 had rolled around, he pretty much couldn't leave the house. He was more or less confined to his bed and, couldn't really do any work around the farm anymore. And at this point, the Bell Witch started, tormenting him. He would be laying on the bed or sitting down, and she would, pull his shoes off and fling him around, and she would start slapping his face. And she started, saying a bunch of shit, like cursing at him and, threatening to kill him and all this other kind of stuff. She called him Old Jack Bell.
Now, supposedly these people can't see anything. There's no apparition.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think
invisible.
they ever saw it was always like a disembodied voice.
Okay.
And like, shit happening, like shit flying around and
Right.
things like that. Nobody ever reported like seeing a ghost or anything
Right.
of that nature.
How are we doing on time? We're towards the. We're probably at the 1 hour mark.
Probably, yeah. We are, 54 minutes.
Okay.
You want to take a break?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break.
All right, so we are going to take a break right now. When we get back, we will talk about the death of John Bell. We will
Yeah.
talk about some of the subsequent stories about the Bell Witch and where some of this stuff might have come from. So hang in there for just a few minutes, and we will be back in just a moment.
What's up, you guys? What's up? Are you arguing? Are you having an argument? Hey, stop it! What happened, Pookie? Did she yell at you? Yeah. Did she yell at you? Why are you guys fighting, though? What are you fighting about? What is it, Beijing? Did she make you mad? Did she make you mad? Why are you mad? Is she mad at you? Yeah. You're not all that concerned about it, though, clearly. Okay. Go to your corners.
You love true crime. I love true crime. And I've spent the last 3 years compiling a series of the most intriguing unsolved murders of the 20th century. It's called The Faceless Villain, and Volume 3 is available now. Featuring such fascinating cases as the Ketty murders, the Carrie Babies case, the Frog Boys, the Alcasser murders, and the Inokashira Park dismemberment incident, The Faceless Villain Volume 3 is an involving exploration of unsolved slayings spanning the years from 1980 to 1999. Pick up your copy in print or ebook formats on Amazon, or download the audiobook version from audible.com, and get ready for a chilling journey through modern crime history. All right, we're back. Now, when we... of course, the kitty has to come in and scratch on the chair. She's like, you guys are not paying enough attention to me.
Yeah, she's mad.
So, when we last left, we were talking about John Bell getting tormented in his final illness by the Bell Witch. Now, apparently, his illness was getting worse and worse. On December 19th, 1820, he went into a coma, and on the following day, he died. Now, according to the legend, shortly after John Bell died, his family discovered a vial of, like, some unidentified smoky liquid in a cupboard, and none of them knew where it had come from. So they were kind of curious about what this was. So apparently the son, John Bell Jr., put like a straw in there and took a couple drops out and gave a drop or two to a cat, which dropped dead in a couple of minutes.
That's not in all versions of the story, though.
No, it's not in all versions of the story, but that's in the most common version. So apparently at this stage, they're like, oh, well, presumably John Bell was poisoned, and then the Bell Witch supposedly spoke up and said, I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him.
Yeah.
So then...
He said he won't get out of bed, he'll die.
Yeah, so then, like, some versions of the story, too, say that then the son then threw the vial into the fireplace, and this big blue flame shot out of it and, like, up the chimney. Now, John Bell's funeral is also another thing that happens in the legend. In one version of the story, Kate, as we'll get into that's what they ended up calling her, that she kept singing songs over the preacher that was overseeing the funeral, so it was like drowning him out. The most common version of the story, though, is that after the funeral was over and everyone was leaving the graveyard, she started singing like drinking songs and shit like that, like almost like mocking the fact that he was dead. So apparently, John Bell being killed by the witch, supposedly, was kind of like that was her final mission in life, because there wasn't a lot of reported activity after he died. So the next report of it actually is from April of 1821, when apparently the Bell Witch visited Lucy Bell, John Bell's widow, and said, I'm going away now, but I will come back for a visit in 7 years. Now, according to the story, the witch did come back in 1828, which was 7 years later, and visited with Lucy, and also visited with the son, John Bell Jr. And apparently the two of them had some really nice discussions about various topics, religion and other types of things. And apparently also at this meeting, the Bell Witch made some predictions about future events, such as the outcome of the Civil War, among other things, and apparently they turned out to be true. So the witch...
When was the story written?
Well, yeah.
We'll get there. Okay.
So that's what I mean.
Yeah, I smell something.
That's what I mean. This is like, yeah.
Okay.
So apparently this time the witch hung around for 3 weeks, at which point she said, okay, well, I'm leaving now again, but I will visit your most direct descendant in 107 years. Why 107? I don't know.
Because there's 100, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
Fuck ton back then. And 7 made that shit holy and complete.
Yeah, I guess.
107.
107.
Yeah, a fuck ton of them with God's permission. That's what I'm talking about.
It makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense.
So in this year, which would have been 1935, the closest living relative of John Bell, who was alive at that time, was a physician by the name of Dr. Charles Bailey Bell, who lived in Nashville. Now, he actually ended up writing a book about the Bell Witch himself, which he published in 1934, the year before the witch showed up. But he never did publish a follow-up saying, yeah, the witch totally came and visited me or anything. So presumably she did not. So to this day, the Bell Witch phenomena, although much depleted, is said to continue. Now, the house is no longer there. All that's left of it, you can still go there if you ask permission, because the land is privately owned. But there's apparently like some little bit of cement and like some beams and shit like that, like down in the ground. However, there is the Bell Witch Cave, which did figure a little bit in some versions of the legend. And I believe for a while, the land, like I said, is privately owned. For a while, they only opened the cave to tourists on Halloween, or right around October. I think now they do it pretty much all the time. So you can go there and pay for a ticket and hang out in the cave. And apparently some people have, heard things, seen things, felt like they were being breathed on or punched or whatever. Probably one of the most famous cases from back then about the Bell Witch Cave was that there was a little boy playing in there. I don't know if he was related to the Bells or just a friend of theirs. And he got, I've heard two versions of the story. It's either got an ankle stuck between two rocks or his head stuck between two rocks, which I'm not really sure how he managed that. But apparently he was calling for help, and Kate pulled him out by his feet. So rescued him. So like I said, she's a little bit of a, some people she's nice to and some people she's shitty to, I guess. That's where this whole thing. So like I said, the town of Adams, Tennessee, they still very much, that's probably their main tourist thing, is the Bell Witch thing. They have Bell Witch Cave still that you can go visit. Every October since 2002, they do a play that's called Spirit, that's based on the Bell Witch legend. And they have a whole Bell Witch festival and so everything. So they do it right now for tourist kind of things. Because it's kind of a really small town. I think there's only 600 something people living there. But let's talk a little bit about...
Let's talk about dates, huh?
Where this story came from.
Where and when are we talking about?
Well...
Because here's the deal.
Yeah.
You go online and you'll hear this same Bell Witch legend over and over again. And it's stated as if it's well-documented fact and that everybody agrees that this is what happened and when. But then when you look at the timeline involved, things start kind of breaking down.
Not necessarily the case.
Because most of these stories and books come from 70 years after they said that it happened.
Yeah.
And whenever some shit like that goes down, man, where's this information coming from?
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel like. Okay, so I'm not going to, because most versions of the story, the most popular version of the story, pretty much every version of it that people know, most of the main sourcing comes from Martin Ingram's book, The Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, which was published in 1894. Now, this book was supposedly based on the journal or the diary of one of the Bell sons who was 6 years old at the alleged time of the disturbances, but did not write it down until 30 years later. Also, Martin Ingram said that, okay, well, he gave me this diary, but I promised that I wouldn't publish a book about the Bell Witch until all of the immediate family members were dead, which is why he took until 1894, supposedly, to write the book about it. Now, I should note that although I think a lot of this story is fabricated, most of the people involved in it are real people. There are records of the Bells. I mean, they were a real family. There's,
Are there records of them back in the day having a poltergeist problem?
See, that's the issue.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
All right.
However,
So it could be a writer, a fiction writer, talking about people who really lived, but he had to wait for them all to die before he could actually write about it.
That's kind of what... Now, I'm not saying that he made it up out of whole cloth, because there were stories about the Bell Witch circulating like 50 years after the fact, 40, 50 years after the fact. So it's like... So there were like little inklings of it, but a lot of the stuff, like the stuff about Andrew Jackson, the stuff about the witch killing John Bell, a lot of those details were not in the really early accounts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like some of the early accounts, and even these, like I said, were 40, 50 years after the incidents allegedly took place. Most of them were just like, oh, there was this mischievous spirit in the house, and everybody kind of heard about it, and it used to like spill the milk and throw shit and everything. It didn't say anything about beating anyone up or killing anyone or Andrew Jackson visiting or anything like that. Like all of those details were kind of like added later on. You know what I'm saying? Now, as far as I know, the earliest published mention, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, was in 1856, which, if you will note, because the manifestations supposedly occurred starting in 1817, and then mostly stopped when John Bell died in 1820. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but he wrote about it in 56. That's a long time after.
This is not the book, even.
No? Okay.
This is, apparently there was an article that turned up, and it's unattributed. There's no author on this article, but there was an article that appeared in January and February 1856 that was published in the New England Farmer of Boston, which was like a farmer's almanac type, like a weekly publication. And then there was a Vermont paper called the Green Mountain Freeman, which was like the newspaper put out by the abolitionist movement. They owned it. So these kind of gave a little bit of a rundown of the Bell Witch legend. Now they said, though, that we got this story from the Saturday Evening Post, who published an article, I believe in 1849, about the witch. However, in this article, so I've read, because no one knows if this article exists, okay? The article that supposedly appeared in the Saturday Evening, or was written for the Saturday Evening Post and was not published, because that's something that Martin Ingram said later on, supposedly said, yeah, there was all this weird phenomena going on at the Bell family farm, but that it was Betsy doing it. Like, that she was faking. You know what I mean? So apparently, this article was written for the Saturday Evening Post that essentially said that. According to Martin Ingram, later, the guy who wrote the book later on, he said, oh, well, they decided not to publish because some of the family members were going to sue for libel because they were saying that Betsy had invented the poltergeist phenomena, like that she was doing it in order to get Joshua to marry her or not marry her or something like that. There was like some kind of big fucking story about it. So as far as I know, 1856, this article came in. Like I said, I don't know where they got the story from. Supposedly it was from the Saturday Evening Post, but no one has ever been able to find the original Saturday Evening Post article. Yeah. So I don't know if it was really written and then it was scrapped, like Martin Ingram said. But modern researchers have said, the Saturday Evening Post kept very good records, and they have all of the articles from back then. You know what I mean? I think they've almost all been put online, or you can at least get them on like microfiche and stuff. And they're like, they never found anything like that. And they're like, if we couldn't find it, I don't know how he would have found it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Back in those days, research was even harder.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So I'm not sure. I'm not saying that he just made it up or he's a liar or anything like that.
Maybe
but I'm just saying
that happened.
Maybe somebody just told him, "Oh, well, I wrote an article for the Saturday Evening Post saying this, that, and the other," but they never published it.
Maybe the Post threatened to write that article.
And then
the family got involved.
There's no way of knowing,
Right.
because it would all be just like hearsay and everyone's dead at this point anyway. Now, it should be noted that in this very first mention, she is not called the Bell Witch. She's usually called the Bell Ghost or the Tennessee Ghost. And this article says, yeah, this shit happened 30 years ago. So the first published mention is from many years later already.
Okay, so an article mentioned it and said, yeah, 30 years ago this shit happened. But what did they say happened?
They basically just said that when you would put the lights out in the house at night, then this voice would start talking.
Okay.
The person who wrote the article, and like I said, the person was not named. The article didn't have a name on it. They said that they were friends with Joshua Gardner, who had been the guy who was engaged to marry Betsy Bell. Now, pretty much, like I said, all the article said was that just there was, that there was poltergeist activity, that there was a voice that would happen like in the dark, and that someone asked the ghost, "How long are you going to hang around?" And the ghost reportedly said, "Until Joshua Gardner and Betsy Bell get married." Now, this article also said that Betsy Bell, or implied that Betsy Bell was using quote unquote ventriloquism in order to get Joshua Gardner to marry her.
Let me back up.
Yeah.
So the article said 30 years ago something happened at this location. There was a voice.
Yeah.
The voice said it will be here until these two get married.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now you said poltergeist phenomena. They said poltergeist phenomena, or they say objects moving? What did they say?
I think actually that might have happened a little bit later. I don't know if they mentioned it because I couldn't find like the whole entire article. Basically, it just talked about the voice. There was some shit about poltergeist phenomena later. I don't think they used that word, but they did mention something like in a short paragraph in like a later history of the area about kind of like shit moving.
This is kind of striking me in a certain way. The reports, and these are old reports actually, of what the original phenomenon was, actually sounds kind of plausible. You might have a young girl, just kind of like Janet Hobson from the Enfield poltergeist. Maybe she's young, she's kind of going through puberty, she really wants to get married really badly. She starts manifesting poltergeist phenomena.
Right.
And in this case, there's a voice. Now Janet's poltergeist had a voice, but the voice came out of her own voice box, the voice of a man. There's recordings of it. It's pretty odd.
Yeah.
But it's kind of more like, imagine, some people might say, well, that's possession. No, more like, what if it's a person who's in a trance, okay, kind of exhibiting psychokinesis and speaking in tongues. That'd be something from the church would call it speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
Which is, you have kind of like voices from the subconscious, alter egos and stuff, making proclamations, trying to make this marriage happen. That was important back then.
Yeah.
Maybe she wanted out of the house. So, actually, the very first mention of the phenomenon makes me think that maybe something did happen.
Yeah. Although, like I said,
but it's pretty minor.
Yeah, I believe, and like I said, I don't have the text of the original thing. I've only had like someone else's summary of it. I believe the implication in the early article was that Betsy was faking.
Yeah.
That she was throwing her voice, essentially.
But they also accused Janet Hobson of doing that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that
but
that's
I know
what
that was a real case based upon just how many damn witnesses saw it and what the phenomenon that they reported. It wasn't just that voice that was coming out of her. It was also all those moving objects that they couldn't explain.
Yeah.
Which I've seen that kind of stuff myself, So I'm just saying that the story of the Bell Witch may be a fabrication laid over something that really did happen.
Yeah, because I'm not saying that. That's why I'm saying that, most of the, really outlandish stuff that about the Bell Witch, that probably just came from that one guy's book.
Yeah. They wrote a book about it. They made a Blair Witch style book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Something that was sensational.
But the legend itself was not unheard of when he wrote a book about it. There had been like talk about it, but it wasn't as... But a lot of the crazier details,
yeah,
I think,
because
were
the
added
original
later.
report doesn't mention anything about a dog with a
rabbit head
head, or any of these long convoluted stories about people being poisoned by ghosts or any of that shit.
Yeah, that was all later
That
editions.
sounds like somebody got a hold of a poltergeist story of something that really happened, but it wasn't quite good enough. And years later,
They had to sex it up, sure.
They had to sex that shit up into a best-selling novel.
I kind of suspect we're looking at a situation that's analogous to like the Amityville
Like
horror.
the Amityville horror.
Where something shitty and terrible did happen at that house. A whole family was murdered in that house. That is not in dispute.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the shit that happened, that they said happened later, all the paranormal stuff, I think that was largely invented.
I'm pretty sure it was.
And I'm pretty sure that this might be the case here. I'm not saying that there wasn't some minor poltergeist activity that people heard about. And she might have been faking too. I don't know. But
and now the Amityville case, the little son grew up, and I don't really believe what he says.
Yeah.
The adult Lutzes, George Lutz, said some stuff, and maybe there's something to it. If they moved into that Amityville house after that murder, it was probably a pretty damn creepy house.
I would think.
Maybe they did see a few things, but then later that book deal got signed and it became,
That's what I mean.
And then you had the damn fucking our favorite couple there.
Yeah, the Warrens.
The Warrens, yeah. The Warrens show up, and of course,
whenever
add
they
to
get
anything.
involved,
They'll add to anything.
Well, because like I said, I think from their point of view, they want to get their message of like, demons, and we need to do something about it because they're hardcore Christians and everything. So I feel like I feel like they don't feel like they're lying.
And
we
they
kind
would
of went
fan
into that
the
on our show.
flames of anything that was going on to make it bigger than it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might be dealing with a similar situation, kind of like an Amityville type situation, where there might be something at its core, but then some guys that want to sell a book or make a movie get involved, and then they fucking blow it all out of proportion.
Yeah, because like I said, you can't make like a boring book. It's like people just want to,
And the funny thing is about the later Bell Witch case, or what they're talking about, all the phenomenon, you could tell that they borrowed from the great cases of the past.
Yeah.
Old demonology books, maybe some stuff from spiritualism, and seances, and maybe a few poltergeist cases.
Yeah.
They're borrowing phenomenon from across the board to make a big story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But now you might find this interesting. So now, several years before the famous Red Book came out, Martin Ingram's book, there was a book published in 1886, which was called The History of Tennessee, which was written by the Goodspeed brothers. Now, in this book, it was a history of Tennessee, so it wasn't all about ghosts or anything like that. However, there was a paragraph or two in there mentioning the Bell Witch legend. And I actually do have the text of this because this is in the public domain. And it basically said, a remarkable occurrence, and keep in mind this was published in 1886, a remarkable occurrence which attracted widespread interest was connected with the family of John Bell, who settled near what is now Adams Station about 1804. So great was the excitement that people came from hundreds of miles around to witness the manifestations of what was popularly known as the Bell Witch. As far as I know, this is the first time that it's called the Bell Witch.
Yeah, and
like
look
I said
at the
before,
dates.
Yeah.
Go back and tell us those dates again. This is 84, and they're talking about when? 2006?
1886, this is published, and they're talking about 1804. Well, they're actually talking about 1817 to 1820. That's when the manifestations were. The Bells moved to Tennessee in 1804.
So they're talking about something that happened like 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot of room there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a long time. That's a lifetime.
And in those days, with the limitations of that era, you could say anything
Yeah,
about
pretty
something
much.
that happened 70 years ago.
Yeah. And like I said, this is just a mention like in a Tennessee history book.
Yeah.
They just mentioned it. So, and as far as I know, like I said, this is the first time in public that, in a publication that it was called the Bell Witch. This witch was supposed to be some spiritual being having the voice and attributes of a woman. It was invisible to the eye, yet it would hold conversation and even shake hands with certain individuals. The freaks it performed were wonderful and seemingly designed to annoy the family. It would take the sugar from the bowls, spill the milk, take the quilts from the bed, slap and pinch the children, and then laugh at the discomfiture of its victims. At first, it was supposed to be a good spirit, but its subsequent acts, together with the curses with which it supplemented its remarks, proved the contrary. A volume might be written concerning the performances of this wonderful being, as they are now described by contemporaries and their descendants. That all this actually occurred will not be disputed, nor will a rational explanation be attempted.
It won't be disputed?
Yeah.
It won't be disputed?
It is merely introduced as an
Yeah.
example of superstition,
Yeah.
strong in the minds of all but a few in those times, and not yet wholly extinct.
I think they're talking about a real poltergeist case, but they just laid it on thick.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think you could shake hands with one.
Yeah.
I mean, Lois said she felt it come up out of the floor, and remember that circle around her leg and then around her waist, and then it just kind of vanished. She just kind of felt, what'd she say? Said it just kind of felt like a cold kind of a hand. But I watched that happen. I was standing right in front of her. I didn't see anything to press in on her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It didn't have any substance.
Yeah.
She just went, whoa! I didn't know what was happening, and she goes, it touched me.
Right.
So I didn't see anything snake around her.
Yeah.
I didn't even see clothing to press or anything, so...
Well, like I said, so
It's
much of
just-
it is like subjective.
There's a lot of stuff, during ours to where your feelings of being watched, whatever that means. I don't know how that works. How you feel like you're being watched, and then feelings of it felt like it was real cold, but it wasn't like a normal temperature cold.
Yeah.
It was just, I don't know, like some kind of energy being sucked out of you. Weird. There's a lot of things that happened weird that you don't know if it was just, oh man, it's difficult to describe.
Yeah.
And then objects would move. Weird, but I don't think you could shake hands with it. And it did kind of speak that one time, but it wasn't coherent.
Yeah.
It was fucking spooky. Every hair on my head fucking stood up. It was in that fucking, on that mattress, or not on the mattress, it was on that fold-out cot in that sleeping bag.
Yeah.
In the guest cot. Oh, man. That was weird. I told Lois about it in recent times, and she says, I thought it was like the water going through pipes where the toilet was in the room next door. Mm-hmm. Because on the other side of that wall would have been about where the toilet was.
Yeah.
And she said, it did kind of make noises every now and then over there. But then when I kind of mimicked the sound that it makes, she was like, no, it didn't sound like that. Because I don't think I told her in detail of what I'd actually heard at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of times you just want to kind of stay silent about something, because if you talked about something too long, it would start doing what it was you were talking about.
Yeah.
So if you mentioned things that frightened you a lot, and if it might start doing what frightened you a lot. So it's
So
just
best to just, yeah.
Yeah, it was best to not mention certain things. It followed your lead. It had an intelligence to it.
Yeah.
Weird.
Now, there was also another several-page account of the legend. Now, this was actually published in 1900, although it had supposedly been written in 1880, although the author is uncredited. This was actually put in a book that was kind of about Robertson County, where Adams is, and was supposedly written for Nashville's Centennial Exposition, which took place in 1880. Now, the person that wrote it said that they had got witness testimony from people who were around at the time, including Benjamin Batts, who was a real person, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later because he's kind of important to the story. And this is where the aspect of the story about there was a skull found in a mound near the river bluff nearby, and that's what they thought was causing the disturbances. However, when they dug up the skull and gave it a Christian burial or whatever, it didn't make it go away. This account also said that the witch spoke in several different languages. As far as I know, that's the first, iteration of that fact, and would, set dogs on people. And also, it seems like this is the first mention of John Bell being poisoned by the witch. Like this whole poison story where they found the poison. Even though in later iterations it seemed like it was found in a cupboard, in this story it was found in the chimney flue. You know what I mean? This little bottle.
Yeah.
And in this story it did say that the witch said, I put the poison there with, I was going to kill John Bell with it, but I guess they didn't get to it or something like that. But apparently the witch said that she put it in the chimney.
There's a couple different stories.
That's what I mean. So this seems to be the first, as far as I know, this is the first published reference to the poison bottle.
When you have a couple of different stories, especially this so late in the game after the fucking thing happened, and this is the first time it's mentioned, I tell you, man, that's one author copying another one.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of the case. But like I said, I think that's why this case has always been so interesting to me, because you can see how details got added.
They got added.
Like, as the years went on.
They're building a legend.
Yeah, definitely. And this one also, this particular account, which, like I said, supposedly written in 1880 but not published until 1900, this one also said that the witch could shapeshift, that she could appear as a bear, a black dog, or a rabbit, that she could make a bunch of different animal sounds. This one also kind of like, and it's interesting because I have, in our bedroom, I have like a Bell Witch poster. My friend gave it to me a long time ago.
It's pretty cool.
It's from a place called Madame Talbot's Victorian Lowbrow. Like, she makes like all kind of really cool posters and shit like that. And it's Bell Witch, and it has like all these little scrolls that say different things. That say like mathematics and black dog and stuff like that. The reason that it says that is because in this particular account, and as far as I know, this is the first time this is mentioned, that there's like a family that there wasn't just one ghost, it was a whole family of them. And those were their names. Black Dog, Mathematics.
Mathematics is the name.
Psychography and Jerusalem were like the names of these spirits.
Okay.
Black Dog was supposedly the leader of this group of spirits. So it wasn't just
That's one
one.
Led Zeppelin was talking about.
I guess so.
Yeah.
So apparently there were like some other stories that were published around 1890. That were like not necessarily to do with, although it was kind of attributed to the Bell Witch, just because like crazy shit would happen and they'd be like, yeah, I heard a voice like going like, haha, you've been Bell Witched, which is what I imagined she would say. Like one guy said that he was like trying to put a sack of corn like on his horse and it kept falling off and other stuff. And then like he heard a voice and stuff and telling him you won't touch the bag anymore because it kept falling off the horse, and he just kept trying to put it back on. Apparently there was also an article published in February of 1890 where they published some stories about some Bell Witch adjacent type of stories, but they kind of subtitled it More Tales of a Fishy Flavor.
Yeah.
So I feel like they kind of like knew that these were tall tales, maybe.
Well, it's probably starting to fall into the category of like airship sightings.
Yeah.
Which, not to shit on airship sightings. I think some of the airship sightings might have been what you would call a UFO sighting of today.
Yeah.
Other ones are total pure fabrications.
Yeah.
Because, newspapers of those days, this is the fucking deepest fucking era of yellow journalism. The whole idea was just to sell newspapers. Had nothing to do with fucking telling the truth. Which that's starting to come back, actually. If you look at the news now, they'll tell you anything. But in those days, they would write up a good airship story, and the authors just assumed that you were in on the joke.
I think that happened a lot, because I think this was kind of like, I don't know, like I wasn't around at the time, so like I don't really even know if they publish stuff going, let's see what these rubes will believe, or if they just publish stuff with the knowledge that most people would know that it was just a story.
I think they were fucking with you. They knew that you were liking this shit and that you and that you knew that it was fake.
I kind of feel like maybe it was sort of like, how the old Weekly World News used to be. It's like, I don't really think, other than like, a fringe of crazy people, I don't think anybody that was buying that really believed any of that shit was true.
Right. That, alien babies,
I see. You know what my very favorite
Elvis and aliens.
I still remember my very favorite headline from that. I even bought the issue because it was only like 50 cents or something at the time. I even bought it because I liked it so much. Chocoholic mom gives birth to sugar-coated baby.
Yeah.
And it was like really big on the front page. I'm like, oh, I gotta have that.
Right.
But
it's like there was a lot of that.
That's what I mean. So I feel like some of the newspapers from back in the day might have been of
some of the airship
flavor.
Stories where airship flies over the town, and they can hear the men working on it and yelling, just like they're on a ship, and they drop an anchor, and the anchor comes down and it hits the ground, and a guy comes down the anchor and asks for some water. You know what I mean? So you give them some water.
Man, I'm parched.
And then they say that they're on their way to Philadelphia and they'll be there in a few hours. And come on, they're not talking about aliens.
Yeah,
they're talking about human beings flying a fucking huge ass fucking Zeppelin the size of the Titanic.
Yeah.
Before those things existed.
So they could invent one of those, but they couldn't even think to bring their own water supply.
They didn't have their own water supply. They had everything else in there. They were working, had steam power.
And they're like, water.
I need some water.
The most obvious
thing. Actually, I think they said it
thing.
was tea. They wanted some tea or some coffee,
Oh, well, la-di-da.
Yeah.
Fancy
They're making
lads.
that shit up. What
a crazy thing to make up, though.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's funny because it seems weird to us now. Like, you know what I mean? It's like this whole airship sighting thing. But this shit goes in cycles.
Yeah.
Like, it seems weird to us now because we don't have the cultural context of what was going on at the time. Like, it wouldn't have been weird for them at the time.
Now, back then, they understood it because flight was coming.
Yeah.
And that was just, they were super fucking impressed. They couldn't wait for flight to come.
Yeah.
And balloons and zeppelins were kind of progressing faster than airplanes. This is before the Wright brothers. A lot that they're talking about a lot of this stuff. So they assumed that giant airships would be the first thing that they would see in their lives.
So they're just like jumping the gun.
They're jumping the gun. Although airships did fucking appear, in the 30s.
They did, yeah.
And they were huge.
Yeah.
And it's strange that they don't use them anymore. I mean, things the size of damn shopping centers flying.
Yeah.
Filled with people. They're dangerous as fuck.
Well, that's probably why they don't use them anymore.
But I would imagine that with today's technology, you could get it done a lot safer.
But it's just at this point, you have all this other shit, and it just seems like, why bother? You know what I mean?
Well, an airship is a fucking extreme heavy lift vehicle. You can pick up a lot of weight with that.
Yeah.
It's not fast, but you can move it across the sky like a luxury liner. So you could live in one for months.
That'd be kind of neat.
Yeah, go on a long journey, But, they don't go very high.
Yeah.
Although they didn't back then, you probably could do it now. Oh, yeah, you could do it now.
Yeah, probably.
So you could fly above the weather. That's the thing.
Well, yeah, that's what planes got to do.
You want to fly above the weather, make it a lot safer.
Yeah. So apparently another one of these stories, because like I said, there were a bunch of different stories that came out in 1890 about, like I said, not necessarily about the Bell Witch. Like sometimes they didn't name it they didn't say Bell Witch. Sometimes you just said the witch or, in that area. So I assumed that people would know what they were talking about. So these kind of Bell Witch adjacent stories, although like I said, a lot of them were published under this sort of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of subtitle. Yeah. However, one of these stories, which I really enjoyed, and I'm sure it didn't happen, but it's just like, I just really like this story. So it was a guy named Mr. Winters. That's all he's named as. And this is kind of going back to the origin of the legend, where apparently the John Bell Jr. saw a really big weird bird that he'd never seen before. And so apparently Mr. Winters here, he sees a weird big bird. But he shoots it and he puts it in his game bag. However, when he gets home and opens the game bag, the bird is not there, and then there's a rabbit in there, but then the rabbit disappears.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, later on, apparently this same guy, no, this is a different guy, actually. So this different guy named Mr. Rowland, he reported that he was out in his yard at 9 o'clock one night, burning some, trash or whatever, and this black man with one eye in the middle of his forehead came up to him and told him that he had to go, like, follow me to this big rock and you have to dig there. And then he disappeared. So apparently Mr. Rowland goes and dug that night and they found, like,
a black cyclops.
Yeah, or something. And he was, like, half naked.
That's the first time I've ever heard of a black cyclops.
Yeah,
black
this is,
cyclops
like, really
shows
weird.
Up, follow me, dig here.
Yeah.
And what'd they find?
So
again?
well, here's the thing. He starts digging and he just digs and digs till he's tired. Then so he gets his friend in there to dig and they just keep digging. They found something that they described as quote unquote a kettle turned bottom upward, which doesn't sound all that exciting. Yeah. Then they were trying to take it out, but they claimed that they couldn't do it because the hole kept filling itself back in with dirt. So
that's a weird report.
That's what I mean. It's like, who the fuck, what kind of drugs were they on back then? I don't get it.
That's just it's just an 1800s fucking imagined paranormal phenomenon.
Yeah, it's like, that's crazy. So
well, that's not that crazy. I mean, think of the Japanese. I mean, they had fucking paranormal monsters like umbrellas that could fly,
and their tongues hung out, and they
one
had
tongue and one eye, and one foot. Yeah,
that they just hopped around on, like one leg with a foot on it.
And it's an umbrella.
Yeah.
Now you go like, what kind of crazy shit is that? It made sense back in those days.
That's what I mean. We don't have the context.
Okay.
It just seems weird now because.
And I'm gonna explain to the audience why that shit makes. I forgot what they were called.
Yeah.
But if you see any of them, like on yokai monsters, it's a yokai monster. You're like, what the fuck is that? An umbrella with a single eye and a mouth with a big old tongue and one leg, and it's talking, it's flying, it's trying to kill people. It's because the Japanese were animists. They believed that the older something got, that there'd be a chance that it might come to life.
Right.
Kind of like an ancient, not really all that ancient, but just a kind of an antique Japanese theory of evolution, I guess you could say is what it was. Well, the oldest thing in the average Japanese household was a fucking umbrella because they were old.
Yeah.
Because they were expensive. So you kept them around. You know, the longer they were around, you might think that it might come alive.
Yeah.
You know, imagine that. Oldest thing in your house is a damn umbrella, and you're worried about it. Fucker what might come alive.
It's weird though if they thought that, like, why they didn't think like all of their shit would come to life. Like, did they? Oh my god, that teacup, he's become animate.
Yeah.
They don't have like a yokai monster that looks like a teacup, do they, with the foot?
Because the umbrella would be older.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm just saying at some point.
At some point, you would think.
At some point, the teacup would have to be old enough to, like, come to life, right?
Just
by that logic.
It's just 1800s Japanese thinking.
I'm just, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just leave
17 and 1800s. Tokugawa period fucking Japanese thinking. That's how they would think.
So, as I mentioned before, probably the origin of most of the popular Bell Witch stories is Martin Ingram's book, The Authenticated History of the Bell Witch, which came out in 1894. Now, as I mentioned before, this supposedly was based on a diary by one of the young sons of the Bells, who had been 6 years old at the time of the disturbances, allegedly, but didn't write them down until 30 years later. Gave the diary to gave the diary to someone else, like his older brother or his cousin or something, who then subsequently gave it to Martin Ingram, allegedly. And then Martin Ingram said, well, I'm going to write a book about it, but not until after all of the immediate family members are dead, so I don't get in trouble or whatever. So this book is known as the Red Book. Like I said, this is the one that I read growing up because my grandparents had it. It's kind of like it's kind of a hard read because it's in this very flowery prose, you know what I mean?
How they used to do shit.
How they used to write it. So it's kind of like hard to follow, but pretty much all of your, popular Bell Witch stories come from pretty much this single source. Now the problem is that some of the stuff that he says in that book, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but some of the shit that he says in that book is demonstrably not true. Like, you know what I mean? Like, for example, the stuff about Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, it couldn't happen.
Visiting there. They're like, look, it's like he was a major general at the time. His whereabouts were known.
Yeah.
At the time that in 1819 when he was supposed to have visited the Bell Farm. And they're like, yes, he did own land in that area. I think that he did own some land in that area, but they're pretty sure that he couldn't have been there when it was said that he
added that element to the story to add credibility to the story.
Yeah, because it's a famous person.
Yeah, so you have to be a very suspect when an author does that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely is. But there are like a lot of historical inaccuracies in that. And as
like I said, this is happening. Or you're being told this 70 years after it happened.
Yeah.
So
and even if he's using, because we were talking before, and I saw this on like a Bell Witch documentary that I was watching, where they had a woman who was a skeptic, and she was talking about the Blair Witch Project being found footage, and she suspects that the authenticated history of the Bell Witch might also be like an early form of found footage in the sense that he's writing from a diary that supposedly was from somebody that was there but didn't write it down until 30 years later. But no one has ever seen this diary significantly.
Found footage.
So we don't actually know if this diary exists because no one has ever produced it. Now, you would think that if it really existed, that the author of the book, Martin Ingram, would have published it or would have like publicized it. You know what I mean? If that's what he was basing it on. But he didn't do that.
No. It's not to say that the original incident didn't happen.
Right.
I think something maybe happened.
Yeah.
But then later on, somebody does a Blair Witch Project spin on what happened.
Where it's like, oh, I found
70
this
years later.
diary.
I found this diary.
Or someone gave it to me.
Yeah, and let me tell you what it says.
Yeah.
And then he writes his story.
Like I said, that was a pretty popular literary device, particularly like in Gothic fiction and Victorian era fiction.
It goes back to fucking Dracula.
Yeah, it does. Well, yeah, it's like earlier.
Writing the letters
where
and
it's
shit.
like, it's like, oh, I found like a manuscript in a bottle, and this is what it said. You know, it's like a frame story, like around a story, and it gives it more credibility because it makes it seem real.
Makes it seem historical.
Because it's like, oh, well, I could be in the attic and I could find like an old manuscript, and you know what I mean? So it kind of gives it that air of veracity.
Yeah, Eaters of the Dead was like that too.
Yeah, and I feel like
became 13th Warrior.
Yeah,
became that movie.
Wasn't Robinson Crusoe like that too? Wasn't that like a?
I don't know. I never read that.
Or not? Maybe not Robinson Crusoe. Maybe that's not what I'm thinking of. But it's something else where it was like a manuscript that was like found.
They were a lot more sophisticated back then than people think. You know, they didn't have any laptops or movies to speak of. They never know movies really. They had plays and operas. The main form of entertainment were these books.
Yeah.
And you better know how to write.
Yeah.
So they knew how to play all the games back then. They knew what they were doing.
And like you said, there was a lot of this kind of shit going on.
Yeah, they were already doing it.
So, like I said, most of the main shit, like all the main details of the Bell Witch legend, kind of come from Martin Ingram's book. Now, as I said, there was another book that came out from someone who was actually a direct descendant, even though obviously he wasn't alive at the time all this was. Well, neither was Martin Ingram, wasn't alive when all this shit was going on either. In 1934, Dr. Charles Bailey Bell, who I mentioned before, he was a doctor in Nashville and a direct descendant of John Bell. He wrote a book called The Bell Witch, A Mysterious Spirit, published in 1934. Now, his book was essentially a less flowery retelling of Martin Ingram's book, although there were a couple of differences. Like he really pumped up John Bell's reputation more. Like he spent a lot of the book like talking about what an awesome dude he was and stuff, which I'll get into the reason that he might have done that later on, because I kind of want to talk about that movie, An American Haunting, and because there's some shit in there that I kind of want to get into. So he kind of like went overboard and like talking about what a wonderful man he was, and he was just like unimpeachable and stuff like that. He was also the one that added the details about the witch saying that she would come back later on, and then she came back later on and had discussions with John Bell Jr. in which she predicted various things. So I don't believe that was in Martin Ingram's original book, but that was in Charles Bailey Bell's book, which came out in the 1930s. So that was where that detail came from. That book is known as the Black Book, like I said. We had the red book. I don't think I had the black one. But so now I want to talk a little bit about the movie An American Haunting. This is one of the many, many movies based on the Bell Witch legend. Another one that I watched today, which I do not recommend, was just called The Bell Witch Haunting. I believe it's from 2013, and it was found footage, but it was set in the present day, like of somebody that apparently built their house over where the Bell thing was, and then it was like a Paranormal Activity ripoff, and it was terrible. But this movie, An American Haunting, I think came out in 2005, 2006. Had some big names in it. Donald Sutherland was in it as John Bell. Sissy Spacek was Lucy Bell. And this was pretty much, even though there was like a little wraparound story of like a modern day, it was only like maybe comprised 5 minutes of the movie, but most of it was a pretty standard like retelling of the Bell Witch legend. However, it did have an aspect, and I thought that the movie had just invented this, but apparently there have been like a bunch of other writers that have written about the Bell Witch legend that think that this is like their theory about why, if there was really poltergeist activity, why it would have happened. So in An American Haunting, it ends up being that Betsy Bell is causing the poltergeist activity because she is being molested by her father. And like I said, I thought that was something that they just came up with for the movie, but apparently that's been like kind of a theory that's been circulating in Bell Witch circles, that are saying like if the poltergeist activity did occur at the time, that speculated maybe that was why, that maybe he'd been sexually abusing her, and it was and she was like acting up because of that.
Yeah, some of the stuff that I remember reading back in the 80s, I think came from some of those books in the 1800s that actually kind of implied that the witch kept beating him up
because of that.
Because of improprieties with the daughter.
Yeah. So that's apparently something that's been circulating for a while.
Saying that it was kind of crushing his spirit, and that it was giving all his secrets even to everybody that came to the house, including like the clergy people. And shit.
Yeah.
It's a tale, I'll tell you that.
I mean, the thing is, it's like,
that's not in the original account. See?
Yeah.
Where's this coming from?
I mean, like I said, I can see where that theoretically could come from.
If you're going to write some shit like this, those motherfuckers better be dead before you write
That's
something
what I mean.
That.
It's like
Remember that? They were saying, like, we got to wait for them
there's
all
like
to
no
die.
way of proving it at this stage because
Right.
everyone is dead. And like, the thing about it is that a lot of the Bell family's descendants are still alive and still live in the Adams, Tennessee area. Yeah. I mean, it's a very small town, and it's like there's only like a handful of different families that lived there at the time, and a lot of their descendants are still there. Another thing that they kind of got into, and I didn't even really bring this up very much, but this is part of the original legend. At times, the Bell Witch is known as Kate or Kate Batts. Now, the reason for this is, it's not unclear, but the problem was, Kate Batts, who's actually named Catherine or Katie with a C instead of Kate with a K. Kate with a K, that was like a later spelling. She was actually a real person. She did exist. She was actually, I believe she was Lucy Bell's niece. But she was married to the brother of someone that had like a beef with John Bell at some point. So what ends up happening in a lot of versions of the legend is that Kate Batts, she was, as far as I know, from actual real like historical documentation at the time, she wasn't a witch, but she was like eccentric. She was kind of an eccentric woman. Like she would roll up to church with her 3 slaves, like her retinue, and apparently she was like mouthy, you know what I mean? Kind of pushy, obnoxious. But like I said, she was a real person. She did live around that town. So I think what ended up happening was that over time, the story arose that her and John Bell had some kind of beef, and that she either bewitched him or bewitched his family or sent a demon to like torment the family, or that she was a ghost coming back to haunt them, which would have been hard for her to do because she outlived John Bell by 23 years. She outlived Lucy Bell as well. I think how this ended up happening, one, Kate Batts was, like I said, she was known as something of an eccentric. She was also someone that ran a farm on her own because her husband was disabled, which was something that a lot of women didn't do at the time, so it was seen as unusual. Like I said, she was very mouthy, kind of obnoxious, and so she kind of stood out in the small town. So I think there was that whole thing. Also, I think a lot of people, and they did this in An American Haunting too, they messed it up. They said that there was like, that she felt like her and her husband got cheated on a land deal by John Bell, and that was why she ended up cursing the family. That's not actually what happened. And like I said, I'm going back to like actual records, like church minutes, like, court records, shit like that. What ended up happening, there were 2 different disputes that I think are being conflated. There was a dispute between John Bell and Benjamin Batts, who was not Kate Batts's husband. That was like her brother-in-law or something like that. They barely knew each other. Benjamin Batts, there was a thing where John Bell was trying to buy a slave girl off him, and apparently John Bell gave him $100 and then didn't get the slave right away. And then when he did get the slave, apparently Benjamin Batts came back and said, no, I want her back to resell her because she didn't, I don't know if he thought like she was more valuable than that and he thought he got ripped off or something like that. So there was kind of an argument about it. John Bell said, okay, well, you can have her back for $150, at which point Benjamin paid $120, and then he said, no, that's okay. And then there was like a thing with the church, and the church said, no, that was all cool, you know, what John Bell did. But apparently Benjamin Batts was still pissed off about it. So he took the matter to actual court, and John Bell got convicted of usury, of, charging excessive interest, which at the time was kind of a big deal. John Bell, as a result of his conviction for usury, was excommunicated from the church where he had been an elder. So I think that's where, so there was actually a big, and this is documented, there's court records of it and everything, and there's church minutes of his excommunication. So there was actually like, a dispute there with someone in the Batts family, but it wasn't Kate Batts and it wasn't her husband. You know what I mean? And it didn't have anything to do with the land deal. Now, there was a dispute about a land deal, but that happened with a different guy. That was like a farmer named Josiah Fort. That happened in like 1816 or 1818. And there's court records of that too. But so I think that these kind of three things became enmeshed in people's minds, where they felt like Benjamin Batts and Kate Batts were married, and then there was a land deal and it went bad, and then she got mad at John Bell about it, and then like cursed him and all this other kind of shit. But that's not actually what happened. Like I said, there was not much relation between, that was like Benjamin Batts wasn't Kate Batts's husband, and that wasn't a land deal. It was about a slave, and it was her brother-in-law, and it didn't have anything to do with her. And like I said, I think it was because she had a little bit of a reputation around town too. But then there's stories too, because apparently her family had come to Tennessee from North Carolina too, I believe. Because I guess like a lot of families like went there like in a wagon train, like at the same time. There were also rumors that John Bell and Kate Batts had been having an affair, and that he dumped her like after they got to Tennessee. Actually, the story went that he killed her, like that he put her in a smokehouse and like smoked her to death, and then she haunted him. But like I said, she lived much longer than he did. She died like 23 years after he did. I believe she even outlived his wife, Lucy. So obviously she couldn't come back as a ghost because she was still alive. So, there was that whole thing. There were also some kind of stories that back in North Carolina, that John Bell, he had like a slave that had fallen in love with one of his daughters, Mary, and that he killed the slave, and that maybe that was why this whole thing had started tormenting them and shit like that. But there's like all these weird kind of like little stories about it that don't really have much basis in fact, or there's no way of like establishing.
It's far removed from the original report.
It is, yeah. I mean, like I said, a lot of stories have come about later, and even at the time there was, rumors about what might have caused, this whole thing to take place. And I think there was like a lot of rumors about the family. Like I said, the whole thing about Kate Batts, I think that rumor started a long time ago. Like, because I believe that shit was even in Martin Ingram's book, and maybe even before that, the whole thing about Kate Batts. Even though, like I said, she didn't have anything to do with the dispute that got him excommunicated. And even in all the records of his excommunication and of his conviction for usury that happened at that time, they don't mention any of the, there wasn't any mention of like, oh, he has like all this like shit going on, like extenuating circumstances or anything, which you'd think they would have mentioned if he was being like tormented by a demon or whatever. But they didn't mention it at the time. The story didn't come out. Like I said, I believe the very, very first mention of unusual activity in the, at the Bell household wasn't until like the 1850s.
Yeah.
Or possibly the late 1840s, if that Saturday Evening Post article existed. And even if that did exist, it basically was just saying that
Something happened a long time ago.
that something happened a long time ago. 2, they just pretty much said it was just voices. And 3, implied that Betsy Bell was just using ventriloquism in order to get Joshua Gardner to marry her.
That's why I'm going to say there's a chance that something did happen there, but it's nothing like the stories you hear now.
Yeah.
You know, if something happened there, it'd be more like something along the lines of Enfield or Mammoth Mountain. Something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe it was remembered by some of the locals. But then other outsiders got involved and wanted to make a buck off of it and wrote books.
Yeah. And
I just don't think the Bell Witch story, as commonly understood by, the people that are talking about it mostly, that's not what happened.
Yeah.
Because that story came 70 years later.
Yeah, I mean, with all the details that everybody knows today, the ones that they've made the movies out of and all the other kind of stuff.
That's too late.
Yeah, that happened.
Right.
That wasn't published until much later.
Yeah.
And like I said, as far as I know, there were no contemporaneous accounts.
Yeah.
Nobody wrote down
what
at the
happened.
time that it was going on.
So that means there's no way for these people writing these stories 70 years later to go back to a source material. There's nothing there.
I mean,
what are they going to do? They're going to make shit up.
I mean, the very, very, by very generous estimate, the earliest, possible source, which may not even exist, was 29 years after the, manifestations supposedly ended.
And it seems
29 years.
And it seems to be talking about maybe mild poltergeist.
That's what
Voices,
I mean. And all of that stuff just
stuff
mentioned
right.
voices. Maybe a couple years later, it went on to it spilled milk. But no violence, no killing anyone, no anything like that. All of those details emerged
much later
in Martin Ingram's book.
And 70 years later, in the 1800s, was a fucking eternity.
Yeah.
Because they just didn't keep proper records back then, especially in rural areas.
And like I said, the guy that wrote the Red Book, the famous Red Book, was not alive when he hadn't even been born when all of this stuff was supposedly going on.
Yeah.
And even if he wasn't making up the diary,
Yeah.
even if that diary was real, 1, where is it?
Where is it? Yeah.
2, but let's argue that it is real. Even if it is real, it was written 30 years after the stuff happened by somebody who was 6 years old at the time. I don't remember anything from when I was 6 years old.
Yeah, I remember stuff, but not
that kind of
book.
stuff. Not enough to write a book about.
Where's the diary?
That's what I mean. Now, if they could find the diary,
right.
I mean, it wouldn't be great because it wasn't written at the time the shit was going on, but it would be at least something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It would have been at least closer to the time where the shit actually happened. That's the problem with a lot of these, and I kind of encountered this a lot when I was writing Unseen Hand and stuff, and it even happens with some less esoteric types of true crime and everything. The farther you get away from something, the more shit's gonna get changed. It's like a game of telephone, you know what I mean? It's like somebody writes one wrong thing over here, somebody repeats it, and before you know it, it's like everybody knows that, even though somebody just made an error over here maybe, and then everybody just started repeating it.
And in these times that we're talking about, this was not scientific and historical documentation we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about somebody who's trying to sell the book. And it's sensationalism.
It's all witness testimony.
And storytelling.
Yeah.
So all you can say is that you can say that it was reported 30 years ago something happened over here.
Yeah.
That's what they're basing all these books on. 30 years ago something happened. So the Bell Witch story, as the average person knows it now, is actually 70 years removed from when it supposedly happened.
Yeah.
With very little written records. It was all oral stuff being passed down. And boy, that can get out of hand very quickly.
Well, and like I said, it's not even necessarily that people are knowingly being deceptive even. It's they might have heard something from their mom or something like that, and they're just repeating a story that they're not lying, or they just it's oh, my mom told me and I believe her, so they're just telling you what they heard. You know what I mean?
If anything happened there long ago, it was some kind of poltergeist activity. And then people later remembered it, and then somebody just wrote a book because people remembered it 30 years ago.
Yeah.
and he's going to write whatever he wants to write. Because
Which-
there was nothing recorded.
Yeah, and like I said, everyone was dead at that point.
Yeah.
So yes, their extended descendants were still alive.
Yeah.
Still are, but all of the immediate family members, actually, all of the people that had lived through it, and all of their children were all dead by that time.
One of the things that stands out to me is that, for the most part, a lot of the phenomenon seems to be coming from somewhere in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Some of it's real old stuff from the 1600s. Some of it's 1800s medium level, like with mediums and seances. And some of it sounds kind of like poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
So they're kind of just taking a little bit of everything from the paranormal field at the time of writing.
Yeah.
That's late 1800s.
One interesting theory that I just read an essay about it, and it's online, like if you want to check it out. Joe Nickel, who writes for Skeptical Inquirer, he's also written like a bunch of different books. I have one of his on like freak shows, like in the circus and stuff. It's really good. But he wrote an article about his theory that the Bell Witch story, as written by Martin Ingram, was actually not intended to be a true account. He was just taking the legend and he was constructing a Masonic allegory around it. And he points to like several, I can't remember all of them at the time, but like I said, the article's online, just search Joe Nickel Bell Witch, and it'll come up. I think the article's just called Bell Witch Poltergeist. And he like makes a fairly convincing case that some of the details that were put into the story by Martin Ingram were coded Masonic, kind of that another Mason would have understood. It was like a Masonic allegory. Is what he's saying.
We picked out some stuff. Remember about the jumping coffins?
Yeah.
That had Masonic
Yeah.
allegories in it. So they kind of evidently did that in the paranormal scene back in the days when they
That's
were
what,
writing
yeah,
stuff
and
up.
that's what he's saying, that a lot of these kind of stories were not necessarily intended to be fiction or nonfiction, but were like intended to be allegorical, and like someone else would understand, like another person that was
in the Masons would
understand the symbolism.
Yeah.
And he did. I mean, one particular one that I remember, he's like, the story where they talk about like the witch telling these two guys, hey, go dig here and there's a treasure or whatever. He's like, they're very specific in the size of the hole that they're supposed to dig, and like it's in the southwest corner of this and that. And you know what I mean? So he kind of makes a convincing case that he might have been making Masonic symbolism type.
He's hiding Masonic messages in his
in the story, which, like you
said,
said, that was kind of a common thing in that type of like occult literature, like paranormal type literature, I guess, when spiritualism was becoming a big thing.
So some of it's lost, and some of the context is lost over time because we're not in that same culture.
And that's like something that we kind of pointed out, I think, when we were talking about like that 40 in Archaeology, that show that we did a while back, where we were talking about,
I didn't understand what they were doing was trying to fucking support fucking Adam and Eve and fucking
creationism.
Creationism.
Yeah. That was like a genre, that was a whole genre.
Because a modern person doesn't see that.
Right. You wouldn't.
You don't. They're like, they don't see that as supportive creationism because we're not worried about that anymore.
Yeah. But like back then, that was a big deal.
Right.
So like I said, that's why I kind of and some of the other stories we've done about like various other urban legends, like the Mad Gasser of Mattoon and Spring Hill Jack and all that kind of stuff. It seems weird to us now, like why the fuck would anybody think of that? But at the time, we don't know the context. We didn't live back then. It's like they had a lot of different concerns. There were like different memes, kind of, if you want to use that word, like happening at the time that everyone kind of knew about, but that nowadays it wasn't preserved, so you wouldn't know about it. And I think that's kind of the case here. Like a lot of the details that were added, since no one from back then is still alive now, and so much knowledge and of that, the context in which the shit was written is lost. I don't think that you can really recreate.
If you were to go back in time and pull one of those guys back from the 1800s and show them some of this stuff, you'd probably get a totally different interpretation.
Yeah, I'm sure you would.
Yeah, him. Oh, he was doing it, and this other guy who worked for another newspaper was writing this other stuff, and they were in a war with each other.
Yeah.
write this kind of story, and everybody knew, stuff like that.
And I think, like I said,
You
I
know
think
what's
that,
going on
I think
between
that
our
happened a
celebrities.
lot. I mean, I
Right.
think that happened, like I said, with the story about the pterodactyl, like in
Yeah.
the stalactite or whatever.
Yeah, I took that for fucking real when I first read it. But,
But
looking
when it
at
was-
it about now,
I mean,
I can understand what it is.
The more I read about it, it's like when
Yeah.
you go back to the original source, it was pretty clearly, if you kind of read between the lines, it was pretty clearly written as a fictional account, but in a way to make it sound real, but also in a way that everyone at the time would have known that it was fiction. Because, like I said, they did that type of shit back then. I mean, we say found, like, we're talking about the Blair Witch Project. We're talking about found footage. Now, that's not a new genre. It's just, we
Right.
do it with video now. But back then, they did it with manuscripts.
Yeah,
but it was the same thing.
Victorian infotainment.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. So,
Right.
that, like I said, that again, that's not a new thing. And it's not a
Right.
new thing to, like, conflate, like, history with fantasy. It's like they've been doing that since time immemorial.
Yeah.
That's where all legends and urban legends come from. I mean, like I said, the Bell Witch story, it's a cool story, and it's probably the most famous, I would say it's probably the most famous American ghost story. Now it is.
Yeah.
Like I said, when I was growing up, I knew about it because my grandparents are from there. But, I feel like it didn't really kind of permeate the public consciousness until Blair Witch Project and all the subsequent Bell Witch movies came
It's
out.
like mythicism and Jesus mythicism.
Yeah, similar.
You know what I mean? If there was a Jesus, a real Jesus walking around preaching, nothing of
that survives. No,
of that survives.
because
Everything
there's
is
been so many layers like stacked on top of it over the millennia.
It's all been replaced in order to combat other religions and for politics and stuff like that. Every story about Jesus is actually a story borrowed from another religion to counter that religion and
Yeah.
appropriating from other religions.
Which in a way
So-
makes me kind of sad because, things that happened that long ago, you will never know what the objective truth was. You will never know what really
Right.
happened. Even stuff that happened as recently, relatively recently as the Bell Witch incident, we'll probably never know the truth of that either.
Right.
Because there's just no way of knowing. Unless something comes to light that was written at the time, and even then, it could be a forgery. It's like, there's a million things that it could be. So it's just, there's no way of knowing, like, what really happened.
I think we covered it, huh?
We probably did, yeah.
Let's go ahead and shut it down.
All right, let's shut it down. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Like I said, wanted to do more paranormal, so we wanted to do Bell Witch
Yeah.
because I knew all about that shit growing up, and it's kind of a cool story. So I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of the Bell Witch legend. Remember, if you like the show, like, share, subscribe on all your social media. If you'd like to financially support the show, it would be much appreciated. You can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/13o'clockpodcast, or if you go to our blog, 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com, there is a button in the sidebar to a PayPal account if you'd like to give a one-time donation. That would be very nice of you. Also, remember to our regular shows come out every Tuesday. Movie Retrospective, old movies, comes out every Friday. New movies, matinee show, comes out every Sunday. If you are a patron, you get to see all of them a day ahead, so that's super exciting. And with that, we will shut down episode 173. We will see you next time. Bye.